This is a short video about rebuilding a hydrolift, this guy right here, and the cylinder from an old Allis Chalmers B10, but it also goes on simplicities from the same vintage, sort of the mid 1960s. This one came in the tractor. I think it works, it's not frozen, but I believe some O-rings are blown out because the bottom of the tractor was just coated in oil. So I fully expect that there's some bad O-rings, probably in the pump, not so much in the cylinder, but I'm gonna go through and work through all of it and show you guys what it takes to rebuild one of these units. Here's the B10. This unit, the hydrolift, fits right into this space, and the cylinder attaches to this lifting rod that goes back to the rear lift group and also to the center lift on this tractor. So both the cylinder and the pump came out of the unit, and I now am a proud owner of more O-rings that I know what to do with. I'll probably package O-ring kits after this in case anyone wants to buy some, so you don't have to buy 50 O-rings when you only need one. It's kind of ridiculous, but let's get into tearing things apart. So I have now pulled apart the lift cylinder. And we got the plunger on one side here, hollow tube, and then the anchor point at the other end. The O-ring here is looking pretty good. This traveling ring, it's not super tight. I don't know how tight it's supposed to be, but it passes through this tube fairly easily. And then the O-ring sealing at this end is pretty good. I would bet this cylinder was not leaking given the condition of the O-rings here. Nevertheless, I've got new O-rings. I'm gonna go ahead and replace them. To get this apart, it's fairly straightforward. There were clamps on the outside, 2 of them, that held it together. And the clamps went over the ends of these. There's one on both ends. And then it's just a matter of pulling very hard, pulling this out. There's no threads or anything, it's a friction fit, and the O-ring obviously seals it up. But I'm gonna go ahead and replace the O-ring there, replace the O-ring there. I'm gonna have a look to see. This is a flat type O-ring, so I'm not quite sure I've got the right part for it. We'll get another look at it. Let's see if I can get that nut off the end as well. All right, so still have the nut on the end here with this plunger sealer. I'd love to check that out. In here, this end, which goes like this, we got an O-ring just inside this opening. You can kind of see where it's seated on that brass. This one is definitely still flexible, but when I pulled it out, it was very firm. The other O-ring that goes around the end is there, same size down at this end. This side, this threaded eyelet goes right into it. So I'm not gonna go digging for any sort of O-ring in this area. This is clearly sealed up by this threaded piece here. So I've pulled the O-ring, the original O-ring, off of the end of the piston shaft here. This is what the new O-rings look like. They're round. The original O-ring is flat. Well, there is a slight taper to it, and unfortunately I didn't totally pay attention to the direction of the taper, but it is a relatively flat O-ring. It's also fairly stiff, and I'm guessing that's based on the age of it. So I'm gonna go with a round O-ring. It fits into the cylinder, roughly with the same effort as that flat one that I took out, this one. So I'm not sure if it'll work any better or worse. We'll find out once I get it back in there. So I've got the piston reassembled. The piston actually does slide in much easier than it did before. So I do have some concerns that this particular O-ring was very specific to the cylinder, and I might be tearing it apart again to put this back in. Just wanted to mention these fittings that go into each one, they also have little O-rings on them. The old ones here were definitely flattened, old, worn out. So I'll get some new O-rings there, put that back on, put that together, and start on the pump next. So we got the pulley pulled off the front of the mounting plate. There's 4 bolts behind it, which will help get the plate off. Also, the whole lever is connected to a piston rod here, and it's got some chain link right here. So slide that pin out and we can pull this link off, and that'll disconnect everything, and that should take off this whole arm assembly. One thing I noted is that when I pulled the pulley off, this front bearing cap, whatever you want to call it, it was loose. You can see that it's actually popped out. I'd say that would definitely cause an oil leak. Let's see what this looks like once I get it apart. All right, so the mounting plate and the arm is off. I've got the unit, at least the reservoir, split off. There's a bolt that runs all the way through. See right there, runs all the way through, mounts there. There's a giant O-ring here. I do not have a replacement for it. There's still a little bit of softness. I'm not sure if this part leaks, but I might smear a little bit of extra sealant on it when I put it back together. Because this is a low pressure area, it's mostly just a reservoir, so as long as it's sealing reasonably well, that'll be fine. And yeah, that bolt goes through. It also runs through this shaft to this tube here. So putting it back together, we'll have to line everything back up. And I also had issues getting this drain plug out originally. So this drain plug is a little seized in, so I might be able to get a better grip on it this time. All right, that's off. Try to get the valve body off next, and then try to get this front plate pulled off as well. You can see looks like there's 3 bolts here that go through into it. Oh, 4 bolts. So we'll get those 4 off, separate that. We'll get these 4 screws off, pull the body out, and we'll see what we get for O-rings and conditions. All right, as promised, we have 4 screws out, we have 4 bolts out, and it's into pieces now. So you can see this came off. There are some O-rings here that are going to get replaced. There's a shaft that moves up and down in here. I pulled the snap ring out, sitting right there. In retrospect, maybe I should have pulled those big nuts or bolts out as well while it was still in the unit, because, well, now I'll have to put it in the vise and hopefully not damage any surfaces. The input shaft here, you can see the 2 gears as they come around and spin and generate the pressure. And this is a little sealer. Let's see if I can pop it out here. So this little guy was not on my list of O-rings, but I feel like I definitely need to replace this as well. It seals this shaft, and well, if it leaks, it's gonna blow oil right out the front of this pump. So I'll have to get another one of these in addition to the various O-rings. And in the body here, there are some O-rings inside that we'll work on. And there is another bolt here, and you can see a little shaft running through there. So we'll get this torn apart even further. Oh yes, and this O-ring, it's not round, but it's there. This is the one that I thought was probably leaking more than anything else, because it holds that on there. And if this is generating pressure and is blowing past this O-ring, it's gonna just blow oil everywhere. So, new O-rings all around, new shaft seal, and we'll go from there. In the bottom of this part, the reservoir attaches here, and off the bottom here, there was a nut or a bolt. Pulled it out, it's hollow, and inside of it there's a spring, and seated in that spring was this plunger, which then sits in this, which I believe is a pressure relief valve. The way that it seems to work, all those pieces fit together that way. This sits in the spring, that sits in there, and it seats. You can see it coming up and seating right there. So if enough pressure builds up, it's gonna push this down, and then oil would flow out of these side holes. And there's an O-ring around this guy, so we will replace that O-ring. So now I've got the unit that holds the gears for the pump, and these just set right in here, each of these. There are some other gaskets and components in here. This spacer plate, if I wanted to pull it off, I would then get access to these pieces. I'm not replacing these. I believe they are still available in various repair kits. I'm just going after external gaskets, so I'm gonna leave that there. On the flip side here, down in there, there is a brass shaft. This is where the oil seal was, and I've got a replacement oil seal. Went with a generic, it's $10, and it fits, different color obviously, but this will fit down in there. And I also like to point out that there is a little port down in here. The oil seal sits on a lip in there, so it doesn't block that return port right there. So we'll get the new oil seal in there. No other gaskets, no O-rings on this particular component. So I now have the valve body blown apart. I was able to pull out these two bolts. You can see them here. Be very careful pulling these out. Inside of these, there's a spring that happened just to stay there, and a ball bearing rides at the end of that spring. And then these little carriers, or I don't know what else to call them, they're pushed in and out, and it's by this rod. So this is the rod that goes through it with the raise and lower action of the lever. This passes up and down. The bottom side of this, you can see, very rusty, so I'll clean that up a bit I don't know how crazy I'm gonna end up getting polishing this, but this does go back into the valve body. You can see the rusty end there, and the not so rusty end up there. Then the lines that go out to the piston are here, nothing fancy. They do have O-rings. And then on the back side, where this seats against the main body right here, that sits there. There are the 3 O-rings. I pulled them out. They're sitting right there. So take care pulling this apart. I dropped one of these on the ground. I was lucky to find it. So I'll be replacing the O-rings that are in here and getting it all back together. So I used a wire brush to clean up the bottom of the shaft. One note, in the valve body, there is an O-ring right at the top. You can kind of see it in there. And it runs right across this part here. So I need to get that replaced. So I've got the shaft back in with the O-ring replaced up top. Should have mentioned at the bottom, so we got an O-ring roughly here. There's another O-ring inside this body down at the bottom of this shaft to keep the oil from squeezing out the bottom. So yeah, 2 O-rings in there. You can see them right here. Next, I am going to put these guys with their spring, ball bearing, and follower in there. So the bigger end with a little shiny dot there at the end, that's what the ball rides on. And this other end goes face down in there, and it rides along this shaft. So it's used for controlling the fluid direction, up, down. So when we use the power up or down, we're actuating these guys. So I'll get that all assembled, new O-rings, looking good. I've got the valve body back on, and the 4 screws in the corners hold it in place, are all tightened up. Next, we're going to put the shaft back onto the unit here, and this is a round O-ring. It's just formed into that shape, and I had expected that I'd be able to pull it out, and there it is. And I thought the slightly thicker O-ring would fit in here. And yes, it does smash in there. However, it's too thick. It is, I think, 3/32 versus 1/16. So that slight extra thickness doesn't fit. So don't make my mistake and get the slightly thicker ones, and now you get a bag of 50 of them. Don't even know what I'll do with those. But this original one, it still sits proud of this face. I don't know if we can actually get a good view of it or not. So I'm gonna put it back together and just hope this part doesn't leak. So I'm gonna go back together like this, and we'll bolt it all back up. At this point, we're just into the assembly phase. Put it all back together, fill it with oil, see if it leaks, put it back in the tractor, see if pressure causes it to leak.